So the big tax question is this: how do wealthy people keep their money working for them when selling their business, real estate, or other highly appreciated assets without paying hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars in tax? What if we, as business and real estate owners who have poured blood, sweat, and tears to growing our wealth, and who didn't hire expensive tax attorneys and CPAs to map out an exit strategy, knew their secrets? Instead of recreating the wheel, why can't we just model the way they deferred 30 to 50% in tax, paid off debt, funded their next business dream, and most importantly, leave a financial legacy to give to the causes we believe in most? What if their secrets weren't complicated at all, and you just need a guide who is a few steps ahead of you? That is the question, and this podcast will give you the answers. My name is Brett Swarts, and welcome to Capital Gains Tax Solutions. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Build to Billions podcast, where we guide successful entrepreneurs and investors on their journey from millions to billions. We believe the key to scaling your wealth and compounding your impact is by having a mindset and practice of stewardship over ownership and applying billionaire biblical principles. Our ultimate goal is to help you scale and compound your wealth and life so you can give more all of it away to help MVPs, the most vulnerable people. My name is Brett Swarts, and every episode I'm joined by the world's top entrepreneurs, millionaires, and billionaires, where they share their secrets, insights, and wisdom with us so we can all level up and have a bigger impact. I'm excited about our next guest. He's out of the great state of North Carolina, and he has extensive experience in hospitality and business. Prior to working with Blystone and Donaldson and its formation of Enzo, he was the chief financial officer of Investors Management Corporation, where he led all company development and M&A activities. Additionally, he has served in various executive leadership roles within his portfolio of partner companies, including CEO. Before his role at IMC, he was the CFO and COO of Morehead Capital Management, a middle market private equity firm. There's so much here. I'm really excited about our next guest. He has expertise in scaling businesses, and he's now heading up Blystone and Donaldson, which is a merchant bank, and so much more. Please welcome to the show with me, Mr. Nate Edgerly. Nate, how we doing?
Great. Thank you for having me, Brett. I'm really excited to be here, and I look forward to having a good conversation.
Absolutely. And for our listeners getting to know you for the first time, would you give them just a little bit more about your story and your current focus?
Sure. Yeah. So most of my career, I'm a CPA by training, and I spent about a decade with a Big Four accounting firm, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and I worked with a lot of middle market companies, a lot of private equity groups and hedge funds, and I really enjoyed working with that client base, and so much so that I kind of jumped ship and I went into that industry. Public accounting is great, but it's intense, and you know, a lot of my clients were doing interesting stuff operationally, and you know, from an investment strategy standpoint, seeing a lot of cool things. And so I started the fund that you mentioned earlier, Morehead, with a couple of good friends, and we had a really great run. And you know, I learned a lot about traditional private equity in that process, and sort of like what the role of private equity is and how it works. That there's a lot about that industry that people don't know, the investors don't know about the way it really works. And so I got to see that firsthand. And then our team actually joined our largest investor and took over the leadership of kind of that investment platform, which was a much larger investment platform. So that afforded me the opportunity to work with a lot of businesses ranging from small to really large, you know, billion plus size businesses. And I got to wear a lot of different hats. I played executive roles in the companies, and you know, and through that process, what I learned is exactly what you described at the top of the podcast, which is leadership. Once you really understand leadership, business leadership, it's about people and it's about giving back. It's about serving and creating opportunities. And the best businesses truly are the ones, the most sustainable businesses, the most profitable long-term businesses that create dynastic wealth are the ones that are led with a philosophy of service. And that is been my experience time and again. And that's what I carry into my current role in working with businesses and helping them, figure out everything from scaling strategy through to financing strategy. And my bias is to working with businesses to help them figure out how to be great long-term businesses rather than a flash in the pan. Because in my experience, that's better for the world, better for coworkers, and also creates much greater wealth over time. So
excellent. We're speaking with, again, Mr. Nate Edgerly, and you can learn more if you want to right now by going to blystoneanddonaldson.com, blystoneanddonaldson.com. So let's dive right into the topic at hand, which is scaling with the merchant bank. I mean, first, I think it'd be good to clarify what a merchant bank is, because people might get confused with that if they haven't really heard that term before. And
Sure.
Then let's talk about how the best businesses that have had some success, then really scale it. If they're already multiple millions in revenue and they're looking to scale to billions, and how you might go about helping them do that, Nate.
Sure. Yeah. So, starting with your first question, what is a merchant bank? Well, so for going back to the Gilded Age, there was this idea of a full service financial firm that could basically meet a company where they are and help them figure out capital strategy to accomplish whatever organizational goals they had, whether they needed money directly from principal investing, if it's a great opportunity, if it's something you believe in, or they need bank financing. You can go to a traditional financial institution, help source that financing, or equity financing from a third party. You can help go source that. You can also work with investors to find investments that they may be looking for unique. And so, fast forward from, the late 1800s to, the 1960s, where specialization became a thing, right? So you had all these firms that just hyper-focused on one thing. We manage wealth, or we are an investment bank, or we are a traditional lender, or a money center, or whatever. The merchant bank model is really a throwback to the original idea that businesses need more comprehensive financial solutions, and the highly specialized nature of the financial services landscape now doesn't really lend itself to comprehensive kind of like solution, the provision of comprehensive solutions for a business. It's if you wanted to try to piece together all the stuff you need in order to scale successfully and solve for the capital gap, you'll spend unlimited amounts of money and have 80 different relationships that you're having to manage, versus a merchant bank, which is a one-stop shop. We solve problems.
Perfect. Business. So. Yeah. Comprehensive business capital solutions. Maybe a good way to summarize that, if that sounds good.
Yeah. That's about
okay.
Right.
Great. So let's dive into that. The number one secret to scaling with a merchant bank now, and especially working with you guys.
Sure. Yeah. So, every business is unique in some regard. I mean, the way I've always thought about it is kind of Pareto approach, is that 80% of most business is the same. It's basic fundamental business principles, the virtual laws of finance, basic marketing strategy, operational science, all that stuff. Then there's about 20% of each business that makes it magical, right? It's the thing that they do that delivers unique excess value to the customer in the form of products or services. We start by investing time in understanding how well is the 80% working. Do you have the platform necessary for scale? Do you have those pieces in place? Because if you have deficiencies in any of those fundamentals, you can't really leverage the power of the 20% of value creation in the business. There'll just be gaps. You'll run essentially debts in different areas, like technology debt, or financial debt, or operational debt, and eventually those chickens come home to roost. So we do an assessment of where do you stand with respect to the 80%. Then we dive in and we try to understand what's the special sauce, right? What's the unique value proposition? What are the attributes or resources that the business has that makes it strategically valuable and viable, right? And we use a lot of different frameworks for conducting that assessment. And once we kind of have that comprehensive understanding, we really start in on a cycle. So the cycle is, okay, what is your mission? And that's a very squishy, and companies have different sorts of levels of maturity with respect to how clearly and well they've defined things like their mission, their vision, their purpose, their values, those sorts of things, right? So that's foundational. That defines the context within which all strategic, operational, financial, and tactical work is ultimately done. Then we evaluate, okay, what's your strategic plan? What is your unique market position? The things that you choose to do, the things you choose not to do, that differentiate you in a competitive marketplace for success vis-a-vis the competition. Once that's defined clearly enough, we look at, okay, what's your operating plan? Okay, how do you actually translate your strategy into execution and tactics? And then do you have the resources necessary, usually comes in the form of people and money, in order to execute those objectives? And we build a financial plan behind that to really ask the questions, how lucrative is this particular strategy and execution plan? Do we like it? Do we like the results it produces? And two, how much capital does it consume? And what's the right kind of capital in order to fill that gap? Lots of people refer to it as the net funding gap. You usually look at it over 3 to 5 years and you say, okay, how much capital do we need to feed into the business in order to generate attractive returns? If you look at your financial results and you don't love them, then you go back and reevaluate your strategic and your operating priorities, and you say, okay, do we need to make tweaks here? So there's a holistic sort of feedback mechanism in this planning process, and this that sets really the foundation for the success that the business will ultimately have. It's a deeply involved process that we have a ton of experience with, that basically carries a business from where they are today to what they ultimately want to accomplish with the lowest risk and the greatest probability of success.
Okay, so that was incredible. That was incredible. Yes, thank you so much, Nate. And again, if folks want to take action, go to Blystone and Donaldson.com, Blystone and Donaldson.com. Nate, as a side thing, he's a Tar Heel, but if you're wondering, he's a Tar Heel, but he has also affinities in a respect for the Blue Devils. In case you're curious about that, it's always something I always ask for everyone who's from North Carolina, and so should you, in case you love basketball. So that's a side note. Okay, that being said, okay, let me see if I got that, okay, because I took some notes here. Sounds like a 80-20 principle, right? In the sense that 80% of all businesses are basically have the same type of fundamentals that they need to have in place. And then the 20% is the magical piece of that makes you special, that particular, service or offering that you have is special. Okay. And number one is you got to understand where you're at with the 80%, because if you're not clear on that, and if there's deficiencies in that, then guess what? It's going to throttle the 20% eventually, or it already is throttling, and it's going to come back and haunt you, right? And so understanding and getting clear on that is really, really important, including your mission, vision, values, purpose, and what's viable, what's valuable. I think that was really important. And then you broke it down in these different things. There's probably a whole book on each of them: strategic plan, unique market, choosing what to do and what not to do, operational plan, the resources that are necessary, and then the financial plan. There's so much here, which they can tell is probably why a lot of businesses fail, right? They said the average business fails within the first 5 years. Then the other ones, they kind of sizzle out because they eventually ran out of gas or steam. So what are the biggest mistakes? First of all, did I get a good summary of that? Let me know.
Yeah,
A, and then
great.
B, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see those who have scaled? Because we're actually this podcast is focused on those who've already achieved a million or millions in revenue, right? So they've already achieved some level of success, but they want to scale it all the way, to hundreds of millions to billions in revenue. So walk us through maybe some of the biggest mistakes those who have succeeded, and maybe they're the same as those who are just starting too, but that I want to scale.
Yeah. So absolute number one pitfall is not investing appropriately in culture and people systems in the organization. And by people systems, I mean everything from hiring and recruiting and hiring through to onboarding to training, performance management, incentive structuring. Hugely important process that a lot of businesses don't invest in until later in their evolution. If you think about it, if you're going to scale, eventually a small business that has been operated on a familial basis where everybody has direct contact with, the founder or the leadership team or, basically a cohesive unit, those social bonds don't translate more broadly as you bring more people into the organization or the complexity of the organization increases. It can put a real tax on that kind of psychosocial dynamic, right? So the number one most important thing is to ask, how do we get the right people doing the right things as we're bringing more people into the organization over time, and kind of accelerate that process of indoctrination, inculcation, training, to help them become very productive and engaged teammates, right? That's number one. Absolutely. Far and away the number one thing. The second thing where I see issues is when a business does not understand its customer and its value proposition. It is absolutely essential to have an evolving working theory of how the customer derives value from the offering, both in a holistic sense and in a disaggregated elemental sense. So to say, because think about all of the things that emerge from that. Pricing strategy, right? Hugely important. How you price relative to the competition. If you looked at the average pricing strategy that's employed by call it $5 million top line business, you'd be shocked. I mean, it's what is the other guy charging? Can we come in a little bit lower? What do we think the customer's willingness to pay is? I mean, it's all these concepts that have nothing to do with the actual exchange of value, right? And the better you can understand that, the better you can design your product or service offering. You can target your customers, attract your customers, help them understand the value that they're receiving, and ultimately create the compounding benefits of delivering more and more value and receiving more value in return. That's the tip of the spear, right? And it doesn't receive nearly the attention that it needs, because most founders and leaders take it for granted. They're like, oh, we got lines out the door. Our product's selling like hotcakes. We've got lightning in a bottle, and it's like, yeah, but how durable is it? What's your demographic, right? Like, are you appealing to just Gen X, for example? Because Gen X, they're not going to be in a heavy consumption phase forever. I mean, you got to think, how does my business translate into millennial, Gen Z, et cetera, right? So these sorts of things are really important. Those are probably the two biggest. Then the third thing I would cite is just an unwillingness to plan, or an inability to plan, right? So planning is uncomfortable. It takes time. It feels like it slows things down, especially when you come from an entrepreneurial background and you've been racing, to to build the business to where it is so that you could just get a paycheck. So the idea of deliberate and careful planning is not a muscle that a lot of these businesses possess. And so, when I start working with one of these companies, I'm like, you're going to have to get used to the idea of planning, especially if your business makes long-term commitments, like signing contracts over extended periods of time, leases, for example, capital projects, construction, stuff like that. Like if you're in the business of long-term assets and value creation, you need to plan. You have to plan, and as carefully as possible. So those are my big three.
Oh gosh, that was amazing. Thank you so much for that. I'm gonna try to capture a little bit of that in the replay here, at least a little bit here. The top pitfall for sure is not investing appropriately in people, culture, and systems, right? And breaking it down to hiring, onboarding, training, performance incentives, and just to management of all of that, right? And then as well, getting, as they scale, thinking that familiar, the close, basically not building a SOPs or systems in place where it's all based upon the leadership team. And if you're going to scale, it can't be based upon the familiar, relationships, right? That makes sense. So the question asked is, how do we get the right people to do the right things over time? They want to be productive plus engaged, right? Teammates. More and more here, but I think those are some of the key things, and then you got to be willing to plan. Okay, so that all makes sense. So now let's talk about how your guys, maybe some case studies. Just bring this thing to life here, right? Again, BlystoneandDonaldson.com, BlystoneandDonaldson.com. Let's walk through how Blystone and Donaldson helps, maybe or has helped, a success story and with these types of things, and that'll bring it to life for us.
Sure. Yeah. So, obviously, for client confidentiality, I won't share names, but there are a lot of businesses, well-known businesses in the area that we've worked with, and I think really some of our successes have been with hospitality businesses in particular. Companies that have 3 to 10 units that are they've got a sound, what I would call unit economic model. So the basic store, 4-wall store economics are really good, but they're confronting a lot of really big questions like, what markets should I go into? What is my brand? What systems and processes do I need to develop in order to scale quickly? Who are the right people to bring onto the executive team and win? So what we've done, and then how much money do I need, and what's the most efficient form of capital to support growth? So we go through the process that I described with them, and it's intense, and it's usually a completely unused muscle in the organization at that stage. You've got incredibly hardworking people who are really passionate, who want to see the concept be successful, right? So, our work is to first and foremost meet that team where they are, to have a very realistic assessment of where are they in the evolutionary process in a totally non-judgmental way. So it's like you are where you are, and you've had success, and it's gotten you where it's gotten you, but what got you here won't get you there, right? Old, classic saying. And, so through a process of, really the key is to be curious and ask a lot of questions. And over time, as you hear from a lot of different perspectives, you understand what the leadership wants, you start to piece together a perspective on where the business can go, where the issues are, what needs to be addressed short-term, medium-term, long-term. You start to formalize that process. A critical piece of that process is what I described earlier, which is the development of the financial plan. That's where we really do a lot of heavy lifting. So most of the time, these businesses don't have sophisticated financial functions. They don't have a CFO. They don't have a VP of finance. I mean, they've got a controller maybe, or they're doing outsourced bookkeeping, on QuickBooks, whatever. I mean, I've seen $150 million top line companies running on QuickBooks, and it's just, it's okay. It's what got them there. Right. But, we can come in and sort of bring the financial sophistication to say, okay, what really are your financial attributes today, and based on the plan you have for the business? And then we package that in a way that first and foremost, it makes sense to the leadership team and the company. And then we take that and we solve for the most efficient source of capital that we can find that's strategically aligned with where the business wants to go. We do not go out and find the cheapest capital. The cheapest capital is invariably, there are problems with the cheapest capital typically. You want to find the right strategic capital provider for the business that understands the business, understands the story, gets along with the leadership team, is going to ride it through the growth and understand that not everything goes up and to the right. That's just a fiction, right? And real growth is bumpy and it encounters challenges. And the right financial partners are the ones who understand that journey and see the value that can be created over the long term. So that's really our expertise, is like alignment on that side of the equation. But you can't get there until you do the other stuff. You got to do the other stuff in order to get to that point.
Okay, so again, took a massive amount of notes. I feel like there's at least 2 or 3 books in this, or maybe you have written a book. Maybe you could talk about that now. You could share that. There's so much wisdom that I'm taking just a ton of notes here. Okay, so got it. So you work with hospitality brands. You're asking the right questions. You're being curious. You're setting a tone that it's non-judgmental. It's like, hey, you are where you are, and you've had success, but where you are, how you've gotten here is not how you're going to get there, right? And so it's showing up, and it's working with those who are humble to hear and be willing to grow. I think that's what you're saying here, right? Which is great. And all right, so let's get even more practical, right? So someone approaches you and they say, all right, Nate, I got 10 million in revenue. I'm ready. I want to go to 100 million in revenue. I want to do the next, 5 to 10 years, and I need your help, right? And so practically working with you guys, what does that look like? And so we can kind of paint this picture.
Yeah. Step one is what's your addressable market for the value proposition you have today? Mm-hmm. So market analysis is hugely important. So, I see a lot of companies stumble with that. And you have to understand that if you're setting a goal like that, right? Otherwise, a lot of bad stuff happens. First of all, the people around you don't believe it, and they're like, no, there's no way there's a market for that, right? Like, I can't be inspired by that. Second, you encounter headwinds with anybody you try to partner with in achieving that objective. So you have to have really sound basis for saying we can be $100 million company, right? There are lots of really great $10 million companies out there. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to grow, you have to have a strategy, and you have to have a value proposition that appeals to a large enough market that you can achieve those kinds of results. That's often a sobering conversation, right? Like when you sit down with somebody and you're like, look, you either need to change your business. If you want $100 million of top line, you either need to change your business, or you have to do some really hard stuff to get there, or it's just not possible with the existing business model. So that doesn't mean you can't be a great business. You're not going to be that big. That's the threshold question. Once you've checked that box, you move downstream to, okay, what's the competitive landscape, right? Which is about attainable market, serviceable market. Then it's a question of how does the business grow, right? Is it a software company that needs a sales force and a marketing program to get better reach to companies, target companies of the profile that would buy the software? Is it a hospitality business that grows by building new units in new markets, right? So the way a company grows is really important. Understanding that is really important in trying to figure out, okay, how fast can we grow? How much capital will it take to grow? What investments do we need to make in the business in order to realize that growth? Different business models require different investments. Like I said, software, you need a sales force. You got to have really good software. You got to have really good support, development, but you got to have effective sales. In a hospitality business, you have to have really great people systems. You have to have really great real estate function. You have to be able to build the units on budget, on time, get the units open, serving the right customers in the right markets in the right ways. So it really, you dissect and examine the business model and say, okay, what is it that fuels growth? Then you put the resources behind that to push the company up the growth curve. And there's a lot of art and science in that.
Okay, what about the service model or the service business? You mentioned hospitality, and you mentioned, I think, product. But what about the service business?
Service business, like business services, B2B or consumer services.
Yeah. B2B.
Yeah. So a lot
B2C.
Of service business.
Yeah.
A lot of business services have units of economics that you can analyze pretty effectively. So take, for example, probably the hottest middle market private equity investment strategy is to roll up HVAC companies. They provide a service to customers. It's a necessary service. It's good recurring revenue. Again, that has a unit of economics. It's usually a talented technician, a truck, tools, and it's all about route optimization. The average visit value, and basically utilization of the service person and the assets they carry with them, right? It's one of the biggest questions when you're evaluating any type of business is what's the unit of economics, right? If you can understand the unit of economics of the business, and by that I mean the thing that drives value for the customer in the business. And then you ask the question of, is that scalable? So looking at the HVAC example, the question would be, are there enough technicians in my market in order to grow the business? In my market, what's the total market size? Am I going to have to move into new communities? If I do that, do I do it through acquisition or do I do it organically by building the business slowly in the new market? All those decisions are critically important. So I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. That was really helpful. I appreciate that. Okay. This is again, the notes are extensive here. You guys can go back and listen to that again, because there's just so much meat there, which I appreciate. You can tell that Nate is an expert in this. Blystone and Donaldson, blystoneanddonaldson.com, everybody. blystoneanddonaldson.com if you want to learn and connect with Nate. Let's move into the section where we talk about exits, massive exits, right? So you've built this thing up, you've expanded it, you went from 10 million to 100 million in revenue, or you went from 5 million to 10 million, and you are ready for that exit, right? You're ready for that change, and you have this massive capital gains tax, Nate. So I'm curious, what has been your best either strategy, approach when it comes to large capital gains tax events for yourself or for the clients that you serve?
Yeah, great question. So the first thing that I typically say to folks is, if you've got a great business, don't sell it. There's something called capital cycle theory, and I'll distill it really quickly, is that capital washes through different industries and microeconomies at different times. Sometimes there's contraction, sometimes there's expansion. invariably what will happen is at some point along the way, there will be demand for your business that exceeds the value of which is the value offered to you by a potential buyer exceeds any conceivable or realistic value that you could create with the business on your own. Usually it comes from a strategic buyer, because strategic buyers can realize a lot of synergies. They can offer higher prices, all kinds of stuff like that. That's when I would advise someone to sell their business. I would say once the capital cycle has come to you, Buffett puts this like Mr. Market makes you an offer you can't refuse, right? That's when you sell your business. And then you got the question of how do you structure it in the most tax efficient way, which I think is your question. I've seen every flavor of transaction imaginable. Obviously you want to get capital gains rather than ordinary income. Going back to the very beginning, when you form a business, you have a pretty important decision to make. Am I going to be a C corporation, or am I going to be a partnership or an LLC, right? That can have big downstream implications for how tax efficient the growth has been and how tax efficient the sale will ultimately be. So if you have the ability at the beginning to understand where you want to take the business, you can answer some pretty important questions that I see a lot of businesses struggle with after they've been around for a while. They're like, oh, damn, we should have been a C corporation, or, oh man, it would be so much easier if we were a partnership, right? Or it would have been so much more tax efficient if we were X, Y, or Z. But in general, play the cards you're dealt when Mr. Market comes and makes you an offer you can't refuse. The game is to designate as much of the asset being sold as a capital asset as possible, right? That could come in the form of sale of multiple different things. It could be the interest in the entity. It could be personal goodwill of the founder. It could be, but you want to be really clear on what assets am I selling and how is the purchase price allocated to those assets. Lots of times businesses will want to make an asset purchase. Depending on the type of entity that you have, that can be very, very tax inefficient. So a seller, for a whole host of reasons, some legal, some financial, and tax, will want to sell the equity in the business. It's a more tax efficient approach than, in most cases, than selling the assets of the business. So there's a whole lot of things you can do. Depending on whether I'm advising a buyer or a seller, you take a very different approach. But when I'm advising a seller, it's make sure that you know what the assets are that you're selling, and designate as many of them as capital assets as you possibly can, and long-term capital assets, so you benefit from long-term capital gains. Then there are lots of things you can do, staging the purchase over time to get some time value of money benefit. If you're willing to take that risk with the business, maybe hold a seller financing or a little bit of residual equity in the company, something like that for a second bite at the apple. There's lots of stuff you can do.
Okay, excellent. I appreciate you sharing that. If you could create the perfect capital gains tax exit plan, what 3 things would be non-negotiable? So just not what if you could create it, you could write the law on right now, right? And make it reasonable, right? But what are the 3 things that are like non-negotiable that you would have to have or would want to have?
Like if I could write the tax law, or if I could, working within the existing tax law.
Yeah, work within within the existing. That's probably because you probably just say, oh, no cap gains tax or whatever, right? Or it's just So, but yeah, work within the existing. What are the 3 non-negotiables that you think you would want to have, or an entrepreneur would want to have?
Yeah. So first, I would want to, if I'm starting a business today, I would want to take advantage of, and I can't remember the code section. It's just been expanded in the.
Is it for the C Corp QSBS for the first 10 million tax free?
Yeah, but it's been raised. So if you've got that, do it. Like that is a great. That is an easy
one. That's talking about being a C Corp versus an S Corp, right? That's what we're saying here.
Yeah. So that's probably number one. Number two is if you plan to grow your business by reinvesting the profits from operations, you probably want to be a C corp, because you can generate high after-tax returns on invested capital by compounding inside the C corp structure at a 21% tax rate. Then you sell the stock and you have long-term capital gains rates that are really attractive. So knowing as early as possible what your source of capital is for growth is really important. If you can take advantage of the C corp structure, awesome. Now, here's the thing. Tax rules always change. That didn't used to be the case. It looks like it will be the case for the foreseeable future, but we don't know what the future holds. So flexibility is important. And then the third piece would be creative estate planning. If you are, and people have different philosophies about this. I mean, founders, matriarchs or patriarchs who build businesses and have kids and, spouses, and they have different perspectives on how wealth is handled. But there is absolutely no question that transitioning, taking advantage of a lot of that's too strong a phrase, availing yourself of what the tax rules provide, in terms of estate planning, you can really move a lot of high value assets into lower tax hands. And so I would do as much of that as possible to the extent the founder and owner is comfortable doing that, because through that distribution, you lower your effective tax rate on a sale. So those are probably the three biggies that I would think about.
Okay, excellent. And by the way, there's a purpose for that question too. It's a little self-serving. Part of what we do here at my company is we build capital gains tax exit plans, and we do it in a way that serves the purpose-driven entrepreneur who wants to exit a highly appreciated business, Bitcoin or real estate, and wants the flexibility to go back into their own business deal, eliminate estate tax, defer some cap gains tax, and ultimately have the ability to multiply their freedom and impact for their exits. And we use something that's interesting, because you mentioned the installment sale as a part of it for the second bite of the apple. We actually use the installment sale with a trust, but we don't require them to carry back for the buyer. In other words, the worst nightmare I think for a lot of sellers is like, oh, I have to go back and take the business over that I just sold 2 years ago because because I financed it, and now they've run the business to the ground, or they failed, or whatever happened, and now I'm back to where I was before. By the way, most of our larger M&A deals, it's a 66-33 kind of thing, where they are having that second bite of the apple. But regardless, you don't have to feel like you're bound to the tax being, if only you can defer with the current buyer. In other words, diversify the wealth, get liquidity, get diversification, get the wealth outside of the deal is a big thing. So that's what we help to build. But we use an installment sale with the trust. Then we use another one where we eliminate the estate tax, and by the way, the QSBS is now up to 15 million. I looked it up while we were talking. So it went to 10 to 15 million, which is nice. The estate tax exemption went from basically, it's now 30 million married, 15 million single. But these are all things you need to be aware of. Mm-hmm. And so our strategy, Nate, which is neat, and tell me what you think, we can eliminate the estate tax out the sale, no matter what the size of the deal, without giving not having any life insurance, gifting, or charity required. So that's nice. You can defer cap gains tax for a part of it, but you have to pay some tax along your lifetime on our 2.0 version. Our 1.0, it doesn't eliminate the estate tax, but you can defer the cap gains tax basically every 10 years for 10 years and just keep kicking the can. Your kids can step into your shoes. You only pay tax on what you receive in the given year. But it works. You don't have any seasoning. So you don't have to be a C Corp. You don't have to be an S Corp. You don't have to be any one thing. You also don't have to season it for those who haven't seasoned the C Corp for 5 years, right? For the QSBS. By the way, if people want to learn more about this, go to capitalgainstaxsolutions.com. We also wrote a book on it called Building a Capital Gains Tax Exit Plan. So you can look at your options and then you can figure out what's best for you. I'm curious, Nate, what we use is something called a Deferred Sales Trust. Have you heard of this? Have you explored it? That's our focus, but I'm curious what your feedback is on that.
Yeah, no, you're playing chess here with these strategies. I mean, that's it's really it, what you're talking about is kind of next level planning for exits. And it's sophisticated, and it can be really worthwhile under the right circumstances. And I'm sure you go into all this in your book and when you're working with clients, but it's funny, like circumstances are always unique, and it's like I would imagine that when you're working with clients, there are nuances almost every time to understanding, like, what specifically does the founder want? Like, what do they want for their kids? What do they want for their, and, who's going to run the trust, and who's going to, like all these questions, how much will I retain control, vote value, all that stuff. Like, it's so nuanced, which is why I think you have to have a partner in figuring all that out. Like it sounds like you guys are absolute experts in this area. So, I think that's incredibly valuable. I will say one thing that I've always found very, very funny. I've done a lot of seller financings and retained equity in deals. I'm willing to go on record that every single time a founder took back over the company, they made their money again on the second time around. Like it's like, because what happens is they sell it to somebody. They come in, they're arrogant. They think they know how to run the business. They've got the perfect strategy, smartest guys in the room. The McKinsey, worked at Goldman Sachs, they're all super smart. And they come into the business with their blue suits and red ties, and they wreck it. And the founder comes back in and is like, I'm just going to do what I did last time, up and to the right. And they make their, like, to me, that's the best second bite at the apple, honestly. Like if you've got, do seller financing. If you're willing to go back into the business, if you're not done with the rodeo, like if you're done, you're done, and you don't want to ever go back to the well. But I love it. I love it when a founder comes back in and they're like, you guys are so smart, but let me show you how to do it again.
It's a classic Steve Jobs, right? When they kicked him out, it's the ultimate, like, oh my gosh. And then they bring him back, and then, the rest is history, the largest in the world, all the stuff. So no, I think that's a great point. I always like playing basketball on the road games. I'd much rather play those in the home games, and the crowds that were kind of crazy, and, all rooting against you, and then beating those teams that thought they were going to beat you, right? And that thought they were better than you, and you come in there and you beat them on their home court, which is always pretty fun. I think that's kind of what I think about when you say that. We're totally out of time. You ready for lightning round?
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay, let's do it.
We'll go quick. So, number one book you recommend or give to the most the past year?
Unreasonable Hospitality by Will Guidara.
Excellent. Question number two, what are you most curious about right now?
Most curious about? I am probably most curious about what is going to happen macroeconomically with all of the changes. Yeah.
100%. Question number three, number one leadership quote or theme that you strive to live by?
People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
I love it. Question number four. Let me think. That question escaped me. I don't know what question number four was. I guess this is question number four now. Coach K, in his prime, right? With what was it? The number one pick, Connor.
I know. Yeah.
Okay. The guy just got picked number one versus, you have, Tar Heels coach. I got so bad. Dean Smith. I won't say Michael Jordan because obviously that's no brainer. Michael and Dean Smith are going to win every single time. So I'm trying to think of a lesser Tar Heel that's still pretty good that could match up.
Dean, here's I can answer the question. Dean Smith with anybody.
Yeah. Okay. There we go. All right. I love it. And then the last question, and we'll wrap it up. How do you best stay centered in your values and charged up after all your success, helping all the people who helped Nate? What's something that how you stay ultra disciplined and stay focused to charge for the next mountain to climb?
Really easy. I experienced a lot of joy working with individuals and seeing them grow and have aha moments and be successful, and that really fills my bucket. So that keeps me motivated to do it again and again and again. I also have a wonderful family that keeps me really honest and reminds me regularly how important it is to take care of people. So
amazing. Nate Edgerly, I want to just thank you for being on the show. We're totally out of time. We went over, but it was worth it because the wisdom was just so deep and rich. I want to encourage you to keep using that wisdom to be a blessing, help businesses scale, help business make a bigger impact. It's literally, you're the perfect guest for this podcast because we want to help all of the entrepreneurs scale from millions to billions so they get more all the way to help MVPs make a bigger impact. For our listeners who want to get in touch with you one last time, what's the best place for them to find you?
My contact information is on the website, blystoneanddonaldson.com. Feel free to reach out to me there or through LinkedIn or through really, any avenue.
Awesome. Thank you, Nate. And I also want to thank all of our listeners for listening to another episode of the Build to Billions podcast. We're also streaming on Capital Gains Tax Solutions podcast and YouTube channels. And we're on this journey with you to scale from millions to billions so we can get more all the way to help MVPs. I want to encourage you to take action today. You should probably share this and listen to this again just so you can download how rich it is. I know I will be doing it with my own show. I took pages of notes here. And of course, reach out to Nate to help you to scale. If you feel like you could be a good fit for him, just go to his website, the blystoneanddonaldson.com. And if you have a massive exit coming up, we would love the opportunity to help with you, work with you to build a capital gains tax exit plan. Just go to capitalgainstaxsolutions.com. Appreciate everyone listening out there, and we'll talk again real soon. Bye now.
You have just listened to another information-packed episode of Capital Gains Tax Solutions with Brett Swarts. We hope you enjoyed today's show and found it helpful. Visit capitalgainstaxsolutions.com to access the show notes and to access more resources. Don't forget to leave a review and join us again next time.